Δόξα σοι το δείξαντι το φως, δόξα εν ύψης της Θεόν, και επί γης ειρήνη, εν ανθρώπης ευδοκία.
Τιμνούμεν σε, ευλογούμεν σε, προσκυνούμεν σε, δοξολογούμεν σε, ευχαριστούμεν σοι, για την μεγάλη σου δόξα.
Κύριε βασιλεύ, εκ ουρανιές Πάτερ παντοκράτορ, Κύριε Ιε μονογενές, Ιησού Χριστέ και Άγιον Πνεύμα. Άγιος ο Θεός, Άγιος ισχυρός, Άγιος αθάνατος ελέησον ημάς.
Δόξα Πατρί και Υιός και Αγίο Πνεύματι,
Και αεί και εις τους αιώνας των αιώνων. Αμήν.
Άγιος αθάνατος ελέησον ημάς.
Welcome to The Inner Way, a program exploring the spirituality of the Orthodox Church. I'm your host, Father David Smith. This is our fifth program, the epilogue to my opening programs explaining why I named this video series The Inner Way. In the first videos, I focused on the Divine Liturgy as our starting point, and today I want to read from the book The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, the second letter, which has some remarkable insights into our presence at the Divine Liturgy. I'll take the letter one paragraph at a time. This book consists of fictional letters written from an older demon to a younger demon, supposedly his nephew, who is trying to bring a man over to the devil's side and keep him away from God. At the beginning of the second letter, we learn that the man has become a Christian and has started going to church. And this is the older demon's advice. Quote, "One of our great allies at present is the church itself." Now let me stop there. That's an awesome statement right away. Can you think of any ways in which the church assists the devil in his wicked efforts to keep us away from God? It's a horrific, but not an impossible thought. Anyway, to go on. Do not misunderstand me. I do not mean the church as we see her spread out through all time and space and rooted in eternity, terrible as an army with banners. That, I confess, is a spectacle which makes our boldest tempters uneasy. But fortunately, it is quite invisible to these humans. Let me stop there again. I've written about this before in my book, Help, I'm Bored in Church. There's a great difference between the situation we encounter on any given Sunday in our local churches and the heavenly origin and nature of the church with a capital C. To go back to Lewis, quote, "All your patient sees is the half-finished sham Gothic addition to the existing building. When he goes inside, he sees the local grocer with rather an oily expression on his face, bustling up to offer him one shiny little book containing a liturgy which neither one of them understands, and one shabby little book containing the corrupt texts of a number of religious lyrics, mostly bad and in very small print. Let me stop there. Lewis writes of the practices in the Anglican, not the Orthodox Church, although I think there are some parallels. To go on, quote, when he gets to his pew and looks round him, he sees just that selection of his neighbors whom he has hitherto avoided. You want to lean pretty heavily on those neighbors, make his mind flit to and fro between an expression like the body of Christ and the actual faces in the next pew. Let me stop there. The phrase, his mind flits to and fro, is a perfect description of logismi. This is the word the church fathers use to describe the thoughts that bounce around in our heads and keep us away from the presence of God. To go on with Lewis, quote, it matters very little, of course, what kind of people that next pew really contains. You may know one of them to be a great warrior on the enemy's side. Now, to stop for a moment, these are demons talking, so the enemy is God. Let me continue. No matter. Your patient, thanks to our Father below, is a fool, provided that any one of those neighbors sing out of tune, or have boots that squeak, or double chins, or odd clothes. The patient will quite easily believe that their religion must therefore be somehow ridiculous. At this present stage, you see, he has an idea of Christians in his mind which he supposes to be spiritual, but which in fact is largely pictorial. His mind is full of togas and sandals and armor and bare legs, and the mere fact that the other people in church wear modern clothes is a real, although of course an unconscious, difficulty to him. Never let it come to the surface. Never let him ask what he expected them to look like. Keep everything hazy in his mind now, and you will have all eternity wherein to amuse yourself by producing in him the particular kind of clarity which hell affords. Unquote. Let me pause to make a couple of comments. Lewis's The Screw Tape Letters has always impressed me with its clear description of the minds of those who want to know God but allow themselves to be distracted. The goal of The Inner Way, this video series, is to help us bring our senses home, to stop their incessant wandering and thereby bring our thoughts into line with our heart's desire, to stop distractions. You want to know God, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this video. I want to know God, otherwise I wouldn't be making it. That's our heart's desire. What stands in the way is our wandering, judging, angry, lustful, curious, self-loving minds fed by our senses. As Lewis said, our minds that flit to and fro. I'll continue to quote from his book. Quote, work hard then on the disappointment or anticlimax which is certainly coming to the patient during his first few weeks as a churchman. The enemy allows this disappointment to occur on the threshold of every human endeavor. It occurs when the boy who has been enchanted in the nursery by stories from the Odyssey buckles down to really learning Greek. It occurs when lovers have got married and begin the real task of learning to live together. In every department of life, It marks the transition from dreaming aspiration to laborious doing. The enemy takes this risk because he has a curious fantasy of making all these disgusting little human vermin into what he calls his free lovers and servants. Sons is the word he uses, with his inveterate love of degrading the whole spiritual world by unnatural liaisons with the two-legged animals. Unquote. Let me pause in the reading to make a couple of comments. Lewis perfectly captures the problem with our wandering minds. We get bored with church and we stop trying. I've seen this. I'll use the example of many of the people who have converted to the faith through my career as a priest who no longer attend the church. I say this with great sadness. These people came to the church and they were enthralled. They loved everything about the church and about the faith. I taught them and nurtured them for months, some for years, and then they were chrismated, brought into the church, and soon after that, disappeared. Why? It's because the divine liturgy is hard work. Church is hard work. It doesn't seem so at the beginning, and it's not hard work for the thousands of people who fill the church for ethnic reasons or family connections or out of habit. The new believer looks around himself and sees no one else working as hard as he knows he must work for his salvation, and he thinks that perhaps they know something he doesn't. After all, he's the newcomer. Why come on time? Why take the faith seriously? It's easier to think about what he might have for lunch after the liturgy than to do the work of the inner way, or better yet, skip the liturgy and spend Sunday morning at a restaurant that serves a nice Sunday brunch. I'll continue with Lewis. The he refers to in this paragraph is God. Quote, desiring their freedom, he therefore refuses to carry them by their mere affections and habits to any of the goals which he sets before them. He leaves them to, quote, do it on their own, unquote, and there lies our opportunity. But also, remember, there lies our danger. If once they get through this initial dryness successfully, they become much less dependent on emotion and therefore are much harder to tempt. Unquote. Let me pause again to make a couple of comments. The question one might ask then is, why is it so hard? Why does God not make salvation easy? Just say a few words, or purchase a Bible, or treat animals nicely. Why do we have to do the work of the inner way? Why does worship have to be hard work? I've had many people in my career ask me for the rules, the minimums. What do I have to do? Just give me the bare necessities. Here are the bare necessities. I'm quoting from St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 25. Quote, one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. Unquote. What is the fuel of worship? Love. Love. We cannot love someone by, I don't know, what could be described as performing the bare necessities. We love someone when we give our hearts, our souls, our minds to that person. We cannot love God when we stand in the divine liturgy and think about what we could have for lunch, or wonder why the person standing near us dresses so funny. This brings us back again to Lewis. Quote, I have been writing hitherto on the assumption that the people in the next pew afford no rational ground for disappointment. Of course, if they do, if the patient knows that the woman with the absurd hat is a fanatical bridge player, or the man with the squeaky boots is a miser and an extortioner, then your task is that much easier. All you then have to do is keep out of his mind the question, if I, being what I am, can consider that I am in some sense a Christian, why should the different vices of the people in the next pew prove that their religion is mere hypocrisy and convention? You may ask whether it is possible to keep such an obvious thought from occurring even to a human mind. It is wormwood. It is. Unquote. Let me pause here. Lewis is saying that the nephew, his name is Wormwood, should try to keep the man from thinking that he's a sinner, just like the other people in the church. Is it possible for demons to keep us from admitting our sins? As Screwtape says, it is wormwood. It is. I'll continue the quotation. Quote, handle him properly, and it simply won't come into his head. He has not been anything like long enough with the enemy to have any real humility yet. What he says, even on his knees, about his own sinfulness is all parrot talk. At bottom, he still believes that he has run up a very favorable credit balance in the enemy's ledger by allowing himself to be converted, and thinks that he is showing great humility and condescension in going to church with these smug, commonplace neighbors at all. Keep him in that state of mind as long as you can. Unquote. Well, that's the end of the letter. Let me say just a couple things about the ending. What does Screwtape want Wormwood to keep from entering the head of his patient? Humility. I must understand myself to be sinning when my wandering, judging, angry, lustful, curious, self-loving mind, fed by the senses, flitting to and fro, pulls me away from God, tears me away from God. It does this continually. And my recognition of this is the first step toward humility, which is, as Lewis points out, necessary for worthy worship. Well, that's it for my opening series, the series on the Divine Liturgy. My main point being that everything we talk about has to take place in the context of the church. Next week, we're moving on to another series in which we'll look at the spiritual discipline of Ezekiel. I hope you'll join me next Friday, and until then, see you in church.